Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thank you, everybody. So, yeah, tonight we're gonna. I'm just gonna kick things off, just about 15 minutes or so, which is certainly not enough time to do blockchain any kind of justice. But what I really want to talk about with you is why people are very excited about the blockchain technology, and why Mr. Moreno is very excited, and why we're all very excited about the BlockLand initiative, because there are a lot of really exciting things going on with this. So I'll just take a few minutes to go over that, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Moreno. So, so what is blockchain? I'll make a kind of a bold statement on this. Blockchain promises to do for transactions what the internet did for data, right? So this is a big statement, because if we think about what the internet changed, it changed almost everything, right? It changed the way we communicate, the way we buy things, right? It changed the way we entertain ourselves, just to name a few. And here are some of the companies that allowed that to happen. So it's a big claim that blockchain can do this for transactions. But and you know, we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. So just for kind of an overview of what I'll talk about, I'm just going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about keeping track of stuff, trust, and pick up basketball, okay? And they'll all relate to blockchain at some point, I promise. All right, so first things first, as Ian mentioned, blockchain is often associated with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, and it certainly is related to that, but it's not the same thing, right? So Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is one application of blockchain technology. And in fact, with Bitcoin, that's really where blockchain technology started. But it's only one application. There's a lot going on with that, and it's very exciting, but in my mind, it might be the least interesting application of blockchain. There's a lot of things that you can do with blockchain besides cryptocurrency, all right? So if it's not cryptocurrency, then what is blockchain? So in short, blockchain is a shared distributed ledger, right, keeping track of things, and it tracks ownership of assets, right? And so it does this it's the distributed part that's different than the ledgers that we have today, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that and how that can apply to business and how that can be very transformational in some of the industries. All right, so the other thing we get a lot of times is, why is it called blockchain? And you know, what's in this name? Well, very simply, we have blocks of data that are chained together. So as tech people, we're not super creative, so that's the name we came up with, right? So now, the way it's chained together and the way that data is organized, there's a lot of technology behind that, and that's what adds in a lot of this trust and the way that you can, you know, count on the blockchain being, you know, non-changeable and you know, at least tamper evident. But you know, at the end of the day, really, they're blocks of data that are chained together, and that's where the name came from. So let's turn to why, you know, why blockchain can be applied to business, where the opportunities might be. So really, there's two things that we need when we do business, right? We have to keep track of things. We have to keep track of ownership, those kinds of things. And we also have to have trust, right? And obviously, we have those two things today because we do business, right? So you know, if we look at that, how do we establish, or how do we keep track of things today? Well, we have ledgers, right? They're not used so much anymore, but we have databases, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can keep track of things. There's a lot of databases out there, Excel spreadsheets. There's a million ways to keep track of things, right? And how do we establish trust today, right? With trust, we establish trust with government-issued IDs, notary publics. You know, we have, you know, certificates. We have, you know, just different trusted parties that that allow us to establish this trust. All right. So, you know, obviously we have these mechanisms today. And if we have these mechanisms, why do we need blockchain, right? So we have ledgers, we have databases, we have the internet, so we can do, you know, business at a distance, and we have credit cards. You know, we have PayPal. So why do we need blockchain? Well, in short, if you look at the trust mechanism behind all of these things, it's all third-party trust mechanisms, right? There's a middle person, a middle entity in there, and that causes some drag on the system, right? That causes some inefficiencies. It costs time and it costs money, right? So blockchain can at least, you know, address some of these things. All right, so what the change is right now, if you look at the way we do business now, a trusted third party has the source of truth, right? It has your ledger. So PayPal or your credit card company or your bank keeps track of your records, and then you need to reconcile with that, right? And if we have shared ledgers, that means everybody has a copy of the ledger, not our own ledger, but the ledger, and it's all copies are up to date and all copies are equally valid, right? And so this gives us some opportunity in business to reduce some of the friction. All right, so this is what it looks like today, right? So before blockchain, we have, Alice's records, Bob's records, the bank's records, the auditor's records, right? We all do business with each other. We all talk and communicate with each other. And, time to time, we have to reconcile those things, right? So maintaining consistency is a lot like, balancing your checkbook, if anybody remembers that, right? I don't know if anybody actually balances their checkbook anymore because of online banking, but essentially, right, you need to check to make sure that those transactions, that you agree with them, that everything's reconciled. In the world after blockchain or with blockchain, everyone has a copy of the ledger. So the auditor, Alice, Bob, and bank all have a copy of the ledger. The ledger all looks the same, right? And this cloud in the middle is the blockchain network and some of the technology that helps us maintain that consistency, helps us decide what order those transactions go on there, who bought what from whom, and how all that works, right? So there's a lot in that little cloud, right? And we're not going to talk about that tonight because we don't have time. I only have 15 minutes. But this is kind of the promise of blockchain. And as Ian alluded to, we'll have some classes throughout the fall that talk about the technology behind this. All right, so how is it done? It's actually, what's neat about blockchain technology is it's done with really well-known technologies that are used elsewhere, right? So it's using digital certificates, which are the same kind of digital certificates that identify, if you go to Amazon.com, that identifies Amazon.com as Amazon.com, and you can trust it. We use public and private key encryption. We use that all the time with digital signatures and those kinds of things today. Distributed systems like cloud computing, we use that today in other venues, and hashing algorithms. So these are all things that we use. We've been using them for years. But what blockchain does is it puts these things together in a novel way that solves a particular problem, okay? So again, this isn't really anything, too new. It's stuff that's pretty familiar to, technology professionals today. All right, so really the story of blockchain, and again, this is just a really high-level overview of this, but blockchain can reduce friction in the system because that third-party trust, third-party verification, and reconciliation is expensive in both time and money. And as a benefit, it can also increase transparency because everybody has a copy of the ledger. Everybody can see what's on the ledger. We can see what these transactions are and who is doing business with who else. And so, it kind of gives parity as to everybody has the same set of information, all right? So that was a really quick, overview of blockchain, right? Way too quick. There's a lot more to it. But I'm going to leave you with an analogy, right? So I like playing basketball, and, there's a difference between, say, a pickup game of basketball and a real organized, say, high school game of basketball, right? And this, I think, illustrates, not perfectly, but it illustrates the difference between a post-blockchain world and a pre-blockchain world. So if we think about a pickup game of basketball, really that's like the post-blockchain world, right? This is a world where that we have blockchain. And we get together, you get some people in the park, you're gonna play ball, you don't need to ask permission, you just need a hoop, and you need a basketball. We get together and we decide, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to play a game to 11, win by 2. And so these are kind of, the rules of the system. And one of the things about blockchain that's neat about the ledger and how things are, put on the ledger are these things called smart contracts, where you agree up front what the contract is, and once those conditions are met, it automatically executes, right? We don't have to involve a third party for that. And so that's a little bit like us agreeing that we're going to play to 11, win by 2, all right? So that is the condition of exit, right? That's how we win the game. So we start playing the game, and say the red team scores, and now it's red team 1, blue team 0. So what you do in a basketball game like that is to agree on the score and to agree what happened, we have a protocol for that, right? So I'm going to get the ball, and I'm going to check the ball. And when I check the ball, I'm going to say red 1, blue 0. And anybody that doesn't agree with that has a chance to say that I said the score wrong, right? And the protocol is majority rules, right? If everybody agrees that it's 1-0, then we're good to go. If I said it wrong and it's really 3-0, then it gets fixed at that time. So we check the ball, we play another play, and we come in and say the blue team scores, and now it's 1-1. And we do this until every time we check to see if have we met that smart contract, right? Are we at 11 yet? And is somebody won by 2? And once we hit that, the game's automatically over because we agreed to that, right? And so we self-organized this, right? We didn't ask permission for this. We just made this game happen, and it happened on our own. If you can compare and contrast that with, say, a high school basketball game, you have to, you still have to have a hoop, you still have to have a ball, you still have to have a team, but you also have to hire some refs, you have to hire a scorekeeper, and now as a player, I can appeal to the refs, but really this third party is in charge, right? I can appeal to the refs, but at the end of the day, the protocol is whatever the ref said, right? I don't really have a way to override that. So again, it's a trusted third party. We train these refs to do what we want them to do. We pay them, but at the end of the day, there's some friction in the system, right, to actually get an official, game of basketball. So that's an imperfect analogy of blockchain, but I think it kind of, for me, really demonstrates the difference between, a blockchain-enabled world and a pre-blockchain world. So with that, that's the 15-minute version of blockchain. I'm sure that you guys all completely understand everything now. But with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Moreno, and he can talk about his vision for how Northeast Ohio can be a global player in the blockchain world, and with the BlockLand initiative. So, perfect. Thank you.
And he can also tell you about the best car dealerships.
All right.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I think you learned everything about blockchain. You don't know anything else. We're all professional coders now. That's actually a really good analogy, though. So let me kind of answer the question of that may be on your mind, which is how does the normal, typical progression of car dealership to technology, the normal career path work? My son puts that effect in there. I don't know why he does it. But anyway, I probably knew that's where I was talking. So the answer is this way. So my youngest son, who's 20, came to me about 2 or 3 years ago and said, Dad, I want to go into the business with you. So it made me do a little soul searching to say, okay, am I going to hand him a generational business, or am I going to hand him a business that doesn't have a lot of shot of success? In terms of the car dealership model, my thought was probably at some point people won't buy cars at car dealerships because technology is just going to advance to that point. So I said, probably don't want to set them up to fail where, in 15 years I go, look what you did to my company. When in reality, the company just would have died by itself. So I had 21 dealerships. I had started the company myself, decided I'm going to sell them all. So I sold 13 of them, have another 4 that I'm selling this year, and I'll sell the last 4 probably sometime in the next 2 or 3 years. So that became what's next. And as I started thinking about what's next, my son and I go on trips together. We joke that we drive, we go to the Pebble Beach Car Show, drive from like Palm Springs to Monterey, and we come up with billion-dollar ideas. So we've come up with all kinds of things that we never did. But one day he comes home from school, he goes, Dad, I have one word for you, Bitcoin. I'm like, what the hell is Bitcoin? And he goes, trust me, take all your money, invest it in Bitcoin. So not being inclined to do so, called my financial guy at Bernstein. And it's kind of a funny story because this will come full circle. That guy who runs Bernstein for the Midwest, who's my financial advisor, ended up quitting his job last week to come work to run our blockchain company. So it's kind of funny how this all ties together. And so I said, Shane, I said, my son says I should put all my money in Bitcoin. He goes, well, definitely don't do that. He said, but this blockchain thing is really interesting. You should study it. So I did. And for the last 2 years, 2.5 years, which in the blockchain world is like 20 years, been studying blockchain, understanding what it's all about. Currency really wasn't that appealing to me. I'm not a human trafficker or drug dealer, so I said that's not really so important. I'd rather get paid in US dollars, so cryptocurrency isn't really my cup of tea. But what are these business and government applications? That was really interesting. So made that decision to start investing in blockchain companies, and then created our own blockchain initiative. And all of the people around me said, well, where are we going to do this? Now, I thought they meant Westlake, downtown, Ohio City. I didn't realize they meant like what state, because it's definitely not Cleveland. And so as they all gave me the same exact advice, let's go to Boston, let's go to Austin, let's go to Denver. I said, well, that doesn't really fit what I want to do. Because I like to tell the story. I came to Cleveland as a millionaire in the sense that I owed millions of dollars. So I said I'm going to give back to the community that gave so much to me. So rather than just accept it and move, I said, what does it take? So the question then became, what does it take for Cleveland to be a place where people like that would say, oh, you got to do it in Cleveland, right? So that's where BlockLand was born. So there's a private initiative that I have over here. BlockLand is about changing the ground. So I think one of you guys with a caterer, well, no, somebody's in the catering business. So I look at it and say, like, if in this room we had to make a cake, we look around and go, we got water, right? That's it. We got electricity, but we don't have anything else. And that's kind of Cleveland. So kind of let me flip through this. So we understand, and by the way, this is, when I say Cleveland, I say this from a perspective of somebody who was born in South America and lived in Boston before moving here. So I know some of you guys are Cleveland, we're in Akron. It's the same shit. Okay, if you're in South America and you say, where are you from? You're not going to say Green. You're not going to say Bath. You're going to say I'm from Cleveland, right? So when I say Cleveland, it's Northeast Ohio. See, I already had the first bleep. Yeah, sorry about that. All right, so this means Northeast Ohio. And let me just summarize this chart. Cleveland or Northeast Ohio, however you want to call it, is completely irrelevant in the tech world. Just is. Now, maybe that's hurtful to say, especially to a guy whose business is about IT. But if you were sitting in Paris and you said, hey, James, name some random Parisian, name the 5 most important cities in America that are in tech, Cleveland wouldn't be one of those 5 cities that random Parisian would name. Wouldn't even be the top 10, probably wouldn't even be in a list until he ran out of cities he knew in America. He'd say, oh, no, Cleveland. There you go. That's where we'd rank. So we have to change that. We have to change that.
Actually ranks 47.
Does it? There you go. So I say 50, so there you go. So technology's role. It used to be, when I was in college, I graduated in 89. See, that way now everybody know how old I am. So I graduated in 89. The people who were in tech were the super geeky people, right? The antisocial people, there was the athletes, the guys who wanted to be business people, lawyers, and it's like all these tech guys, right? That's not so much and so that transcended companies. So as you became a tech guy in a company, you were that kind of like the person they put in a cubicle, but you'd never be the CEO. Today's world is very different. All companies are really tech companies. It's just that you happen to do different things. You do insurance, you do banking. At the end of the day, you're really a technology company. No matter how obscure your company is, it can even be a manufacturing company, it's really technology. So tech's role is really about building a community. So we're irrelevant as a community in technology. We're just going to be irrelevant, period. And the city that stops being relevant and stops innovating will just die. So we'll die a very, very, very slow and painful death, but eventually there will be nothing here. Eventually, if we're not relevant in tech, I don't care if you're in a building business, you need people. You need tenants. And if all of those tenants are gone, you can have the most beautiful, well-constructed buildings in the world, but you have to have a market. If you own a restaurant and there's nobody coming at your restaurant, you're going to go out of business. So tech, we have to be a leader in technology. But we can't just simply say, hey, Cleveland's relevant in tech, and then the world will say, oh my God, I didn't realize that, and then all of a sudden swarms of people come to Cleveland. So there's a few things that are kind of lining up that are making this moment in time possible, which is why I spend so much of my day on this issue. The Earth, Moon, and the stars are aligning. So let me explain exactly those 3 things, the Earth, the Moon, and the stars. The Earth is opportunity zones. You may not like Trump, you may love Trump, it doesn't matter, but in 2017, the tax bill got passed. You may not like that, you may like it, depends on your politics. But the one thing we can all agree on that's amazing about that tax law is this idea of the opportunity zone, which is for somebody who has a capital gains tax. So if I sold my business and I owe the government $1 million, instead of writing the government a check for $1 million, I can invest in a company located in this exact geography. And if I keep that investment for 10 years, I don't owe the government that money anymore. And any appreciation from that business over the next 10 years is also tax-free. So as a capitalist, that's really sexy, right? That's like, whoa, I get to do this, really, really great. From a Cleveland perspective, again, Northeast Ohio perspective, good news, bad news. The good news, we have a lot of opportunity zones. The bad news is we have a lot of opportunity zones, right? That's not necessarily a badge of honor, but we'll take it, right? Meaning that there's investors out there that we can say, hey, this, like for example, downtown Cleveland now, I'm talking about the city of Cleveland, virtually the entire city, the governor just said, because the governor had to decide, basically looked at the map and goes, all Cleveland, right? So all of downtown Cleveland, if you invest anywhere in there, it's an opportunity zone. That's huge. That's this incredible window of opportunity. And there's going to be funds built around that. So people like me that have cap gains will get together with a lot of other people who have cap gains, and we'll create a fund that will be huge, and you can make these strategic investments. The rules around that, so the tax law passed in December, the rules don't come out till next month. So there's a lot of people salivating, waiting. Give us the rules for these opportunity zone funds because we want to start investing in that. That is the earth lining up. The moon lining up is this, blockchain. Eric explained it very, very well. I love the basketball analogy. Basically, here's the way I phrase it. When I was in college, I had a computer, right? So I was that guy, right? And you would plug in, right? And those of you who are old in the room know this word, right? And then the computer, half an hour later, it'd be like prompt, right? And you see a C prompt, and you put hi. And then 10 minutes later, somebody like a Tim across the world would say hi back. You're like, oh my God, it's the coolest thing in the world, right? That's Internet 1.0. I remember my roommate coming in one time and go, what are you doing? I explained it to him. He goes, that's stupid. And so that's Internet 1.0. It didn't do much. It made the tech world really excited, but it didn't do much. Internet 2.0 started in the mid-90s, and I got to watch that firsthand in Boston. The dot-com boom really flourished in the part of Boston I lived in. And that's the world that Eric described earlier, the world we live in today, the world of complete tech dependency. But there's a problem. And the problem is there's massive security problems. I'll illustrate in this room. How many of you either have had your credit card stolen, identity hacked, or know somebody who has? Raise your hand. Look around the room. That's a problem. Now let me tell you why it's a problem. If you have your credit card stolen, it's a pain in the rear end. You have to call, they send you a form, you fill it out. That's a hassle. But where this world is going is that everything goes online. Everything is on the internet. So I don't like James. So he's going to have a self-driving car that's going to take him back to Cleveland, right? And David's going to hitch a ride with him. And I really don't like, well, both of them together. Oof, this is great. So I'm going to hack into that car, and I'm going to drive him off the Cuyahoga County Bridge. That's not a hassle. That's a problem, right? I would never do that to the two of you guys. But, all right. But you see the problem? Credit card theft, annoying. Hacking my car and killing me, big problem. I can log into Eric's house and turn his refrigerator off. I can turn your oven on to 180 degrees, right? So that's a problem. And you have to have security. So all these things going online require security and trust. Blockchain is that answer. Blockchain is Internet 3.0. The shift is just as seismic from I could email Tim and say hi to I can buy anything online to now we have trust and security. So we're at this moment in time, the moon is that blockchain technology is out there. Everybody around blockchain, I say everybody, like this is today, not tomorrow, certainly not in 6 months, is talking about currency. But in the US, we're never going to flourish in the currency world. The currency application of blockchain will happen in the money laundering capitals of the world, right? Singapore, Zurich, London, right? That's a place where that technology will flourish. It's not going to flourish in Cleveland. We can't raise our hand and say, we want to be the epicenter of currency. People are say, Cleveland? What the hell goes on in Cleveland? I get arrested 2 seconds later, right? I can't come into and buy a building for 2 million Bitcoin. You're not going to sell it to me, right? Or you're going to tell the IRS who I am. That's a problem for me, right? I want to do that in Singapore where I can buy a $50 million condo and nobody knows who the hell I am. And I like that, right? Because I'm a drug trafficker and a money launderer. So that works. So the business application side, now people are finally starting to go, wait, beyond currency, what are all these other things that we can do to make government more efficient and business more efficient? That conversation is just starting. So that's the Earth is the opportunity zones. The moon is that blockchain. We can raise our hand and say, hey, Northeast Ohio is crazy relevant about business and government applications. We really got this. We get a seat at the big table. The third thing that's happening, the stars aptly named, is that does anybody want to guess what the poverty level is in Cleveland? How much money do you have to make before you're in a poverty level? Just guesses? $14,000. About right? okay? So you make 14 grand, you're considered poor in Cleveland. Take a guess what that is in Silicon Valley. $137,000. So think about that. Think about that. Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
No. Okay. So my 20-year-olds. Imagine my 20-year-old says to me, "Hey, I got a job making $135,000." All of us would be really proud of our 20-year-old son for getting a job that pays 135 grand. He goes to San Francisco. He's actually the same condition as a person in Cleveland making 14 grand. Think about, process that for a second. It's nuts. That's why there's 55,000 homeless people just in San Francisco alone. It's nuts. So as a result of that, about half the people under the age of 35 in Silicon Valley plan to leave the valley in the next 12 to 24 months. They're going to go somewhere. They're going to have a massive population shift of people that go places. Where are they going to go? We want them to come here to Northeast Ohio. So how do we do that, right? That's the three things that we got to take advantage of, right? The Opportunity Zone funds, the fact that this blockchain technology exists, and we have the ability to recruit people. And we may, one of the things that I say all the time, when I moved here from Boston, the most egotistical city in the country, to Cleveland, the most self-deprecating city in the country, it was like whiplash, right? We got to be a little bit more like Boston in that regard. We got to be proud of what Northeast Ohio has. Right? Great place to raise a family. It's easy. I left downtown Cleveland and got here in 35 minutes. If I wouldn't leave my parking lot in downtown Boston in 35 minutes. I go to an Indians game, be home in 20 minutes. I wouldn't leave the stadium in 20 minutes there. My baseball tickets cost me $75. Everybody's like, oh my God, $75. In Boston, that same ticket's $800, right? My daughter lives in Manhattan. Her apartment's $4,400 a month for a 600 square foot apartment. For $4,400 a month, she can rent this entire building. Sorry, not the whole building. Bill's like, is that an offer? Right? I mean, it's crazy, right? So what that means isn't that we're cheap. What that means is that we can offer a dramatically better quality of life because that extra money you don't pay in rent, you can travel, you can buy a Mercedes, you can go shopping, you can treat yourself to a nice dinner. That's quality of life. And we have great art scene. Not just in Cleveland. Our Akron Art Museum is amazing, right? We got minor league teams, we got major league teams, we got this Great Lake. So we have all these things. We just have to convince even a small number of those people to come to Northeast Ohio. We win, and we do it through these three things. So that's what blockchain and BlockLand is all about. So one of the things that Eric pointed to a little bit, but I just want to really hit on, blockchain is not mainstream adapted. If we were going to have this conversation in 2 years, everything that Eric said, everybody would roll their eyes and go, Eric, come on, we know all this stuff. Because blockchain is going to be it's kind of like if I sat up here and said, hey, what's the internet? Well, James, there's this thing called the World Wide Web. You log on, what? And you can buy shoes, what? And they sell them to you. You're crazy. That doesn't make any sense, right? Blockchain is going to be totally mainstream integrated in the next 3 to 5 years, where it's just like nothing new. So we're here at the stage just before it hits major mainstream adoption, which means we have a shot. What I tell the leaders in Cleveland, I had a meeting with down in City Hall earlier today, this is what I tell the leaders in Cleveland. If we could go in a time machine right now to 1992 and land here and be in charge, whatever that means, of Northeast Ohio, what would we do differently? Would we position Cleveland and Northeast Ohio to take advantage of what we knew was this coming technological wave? When you're bored later tonight, Google Katie Couric, Bryant Gumbel, Today Show. You've probably seen that video, right? Where what's the this stand for? That was 1994. This isn't my grandfather in 1920 used to do this. And this is 24 years ago. What's the internet, right? So we would have done a lot of things differently. And I'm not knocking people who were in charge in the 90s. Manufacturing was great in Ohio in the 90s. Ohio was killing it. So if you were a leader in Northeast Ohio and said, well, how about technology? I'm killing manufacturing. And these tech people are kind of weird and geeky. I don't want anything to do with them, right? So we now have this opportunity to say, we're not going to miss this wave again. That's the urgency that if there's one takeaway from this room, this isn't a Bernie effort. BlockLand, if BlockLand's about me, boop, it's over, presentation's done. This has got to be a full region-wide movement with incredible urgency to get it done. Because if we miss this window of opportunity, I don't know what's going to come next for us to get there. The vision and the goals, I'll say it pretty easy. This is about jobs, 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 and jobs. That's what it's all about. At the end of the day, again, I was sitting at this meeting at City Hall. We're talking about infant mortality, lead poisoning, the breakup of family, all this stuff that we know are social issues. All those things, including health, get fixed with a job. You give somebody a good paying job, they'll stay with their family. They won't get into trouble, right? They will make sure that their kids get a good education. But you give somebody unemployment and no hope, we have issues. So this is about jobs. So the question is, how do we attract a disproportionate number of startups and new companies here? You know, we spend, and this is a little bit of an editorial, so I'm nervous about some of the stuff being recorded, but I don't care. But you know, all these cities are killing themselves to be the headquarters for Amazon, the world's richest man and the most powerful company in the world. Why would we ever even take a shot at something like that? You're going to bring, let's say Amazon chose Cleveland. Amazon now owns Cleveland. Cleveland would become completely subservient to this company that would be all about how do we staff less people in the future, not more. They wouldn't be saying, hey, how do we increase employment and costs? It would be less. That's what companies do. Net new jobs are created with startups. Companies that actually create economic activity in a city are the companies that hire 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 people, and you just multiply that 10,000. They're not as sexy. They're not as sexy as a politician say, I landed Amazon. Okay, at what cost, right? And that doesn't help the community move forward at all. So this is about bringing small businesses that make a substantial impact. Now, if some of those small businesses, or when some of those small businesses become medium and large companies, that's fantastic. But it's about this constant ecosystem of entrepreneurship. So this is the whole effort. So we built it like a blockchain system. Eric explained it well. So it's decentralized. There is no central authority. These things are all highly independent. I'll walk through them super, super fast, but thought leadership is about, remember, this is about attracting companies here. And to some extent, this is already happening. The idea that we've gotten so much press around blockchain is making people go, hey, maybe I do. By the way, the first layer, which I love, is, hey, I moved out to San Francisco, but there's all this activity going on with blockchain. I want back in. So I'm going to move back to Cleveland, right? Because we're a net exporter of talent right now, right? So we want to be an importer of talent and an exporter of thought, right? So that's what thought leadership. So that's our conference. Our conference will be December 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And it'll be the first conference ever that focuses only on business and government applications for blockchain, where you can learn what Eric said, but much greater detail. Political environment, and then there's a regular cadence of meetings between conferences. Political environment, that make certain that Ohio, so when that conference starts, whoever, if it's Cordray or DeWine, that governor stands up at the stage and says, Ohio's open for business for blockchain and tech companies, and we are the most progressive state in the country when it comes to encouraging these kinds of enterprises. Hugely important. Legal system, that we create a legal incubator at our university so that our legal community as a general group is dramatically more knowledgeable. So if I'm looking at a blockchain company, I'll say probably my lawyer's in Cleveland, if that's the goal of that node. Just like if I was saying, hey, I want to do something with the federal government, where would I find a lawyer to do that? Probably DC is my smartest lawyer. Probably the most expensive one too, but that's okay if that happens that way in Cleveland as well. Philanthropy, what are some applications that we can use of blockchain for social good? How do we make sure that our vulnerable populations don't get left behind? And how does philanthropy catalyze this effort? So there's 2 co-chairs for every group. Research innovation, that's going to be on case. In this room, you probably know you're much smarter than the average Bear group. But what's the leading research center in the United States for autonomous driving cars? Why? But that's random, right? Meaning, why Pittsburgh? Like, what existed in Pittsburgh that made Pittsburgh U.S. capital? Why not? And I went to Michigan. Why wasn't it the University of Michigan? Carnegie Mellon raised their hand first and said, we're going to do this. They just grabbed it. That's the model for BlockLand. We just decided we're going to be the U.S. capital for blockchain, just like Carnegie Mellon said, and Pittsburgh said we're going to do it. So research and innovation is about being the smartest world-class leaders anywhere in the world doing the highest level 5, 10, 15, 20-year research is happening at Case. That's really, really, really important, because what Eric didn't tell you is that eventually there's going to be quantum computers that hack blockchains. So blockchains will be not immutable any longer once you have quantum computers. But that's okay, because there's something called quantum blockchain that's going to come next, right? And so that technology and research, that has to be happening here, so that the world looks at it and goes, hey, how does quantum blockchain work? Professor Case, he's the guy or gal, right? So that research innovation node is important. This is really, I think, the most visual part of this effort. There's DriveIT out here in Akron, which I had never met these guys in my life up until 2 months ago. And there's a company in Westlake that does stuff. There's a company in Chagrin that does stuff. There's a company in Ohio City that does stuff. And they shall never meet, which is a problem, because innovation happens when you think of it like atoms, and you crush them together in a very tight space and do something that Charlie Stack, I always give him credit because I don't want to take his word, calls serendipitous collisions. The idea that I'm sitting in my table doing XYZ project, I'm super frustrated, maybe my last startup failed. I said, goddamn, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. I'm getting a cup of coffee. I run to Eric. He starts talking about how he likes basketball. I like basketball. Next thing you know, hey, what do you do here? 3 hours later, a new company is born. That's what happens in that tight area. So one of the things that group is working on is take a look at Station F in Paris. That's our model. So think about a 400 to 500 square foot center that would house tech startups, places like DriveIT or DriveIT Cleveland, angel investors, venture capital funds, this legal incubator, the innovation center for big companies, and a learning laboratory for kids from kindergarten all the way through college. And then we'd put them all in there. And we put them all in this tight space where innovation happens at incredible speed. That's what we want to build. And that would be funded by this Opportunity Zone Fund. So we're thinking if we can get $1 billion, yes, $1 billion, that would fund all these startups. And then the exits from there would fund the other future startups. It becomes this incubator of just amazing success. That's the idea of what the place node is. So that's a lot of work to get that done. Next one is next gen. I'm 51. I don't think it's appropriate for people who are my age, Gen X, to be talking about how to attract 20 to 25-year-olds without having 20 and 25-year-olds part of the movement. Because I don't know what, I can guess, but why guess? Why not, A, get input through all these nodes from young people, B, create a scenario where this also highlights future leaders for Northeast Ohio, and that's what this group is putting together. So I'm really excited about that. Entrepreneurial environment, there's money to be had everywhere, right? So if Eric and I have a great idea for a startup, there's money to be had everywhere. The problem is I don't know how to access it. I don't know who to go to. So we want to put together an entrepreneurial environment that's easily mapped out. So if Vadim, you have an idea, I know exactly who your investor would be, and I'm going to connect you with them. And that there's plenty of places to do that with. Talent development and retention, DriveIT is a big part of that, which is, okay, how many, so I'm going to say this having been the chair of the board of CSU up until May. How many people did we graduate on blockchain technology last semester? 0. We can definitely do better. We have a goal of 1 in 5 years. So I've taken that and said, okay, how do we get, by this time next year, 1,000 coders graduated? 0 to 1,000. And that doesn't mean 4-year degrees, masters, and PhDs. It means certificate programs. It means 6-week programs. It means 13-week programs. So we start building this critical mass, because if we're going to do this, we got to start doing this now. And by the way, if you know a lot about blockchain, you can do a lot of other things too. Doesn't necessarily mean you're only going to be able to do that. And then the retention piece. We have to make certain that we keep an eye on how do we keep that talent here in Northeast Ohio. The last one is business applications. There's a group running that, which is these blockchains to work requires what I call co-opetition. Cooperation that normally involves competition. So banks that normally don't like to work together with each other, insurance companies that don't like to work together, right? So what are some applications? Because we can talk later about 100 different things that you can do with blockchain, but it's like talking about in 1994, all the things that you can buy on the internet, right? And people are like, books. I would never buy a book online. It's my wife. I want to touch it, feel it, smell it. Now every 2 minutes I get, hey, your Amazon shipment. I'm like, God damn it. Right? So all of a sudden she learned how to buy stuff online, right? So that's the same kind of thing. But we want to have 2 minimum by December 1st at our conference, working consortiums. So when people come to Cleveland, it's like, oh, you have the credibility to talk about this because you actually have things working on blockchain, as opposed to there's a conference in Providence, Rhode Island. You go there and say, well, you guys do anything on blockchain? No, but you can do all these cool things. Are you doing any of them? No, right? Well, you need to show that. So this 10 things are the 10 ingredients to make the cake I was just describing. And we have to do it all at the exact same time, and they're all interdependent. You can't just say, oh, we have these 2 business applications running, we're done. No, because you don't have the talent, you don't have the entrepreneurial environment, you don't have the place, you don't have the legal system in place. On the other one, by the way, on the political environment, this happens to be the one that I'm most passionate about. On government, if government runs, forget your ideology, it doesn't matter. If you run the government the way it's being run today, and just forget all the noise, Omarosa, blah, 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 forget all that, right? And just run it out 15 or 20 years, there is no government. My 20-year-old will live, there will be no government left because you can't continue to run a government that inefficiently. Blockchain is a technology that will finally allow government to do what every other company, private business done, which is to digitally transform to be dramatically more efficient. The reason I point that is because Ohio, if this movement has its druthers, will not only announce that we have the most forward-looking legislation, but that the city, the county, and the state are open to private businesses coming in and helping them solve their inefficiency problems through the use of technology. And that will create a gold rush of companies to come to Ohio and specifically Cleveland. Because if I know there's customers, right? I know I can go there and I can get the state of Ohio and do their driver's license program. I can do their title program. I can do their birth certificate program versus going to Texas and they say to me, we're not doing that. We're not going to do any of that, right? That's a big deal. So that's BlockLand in 15 minutes or less. Did I hit 15 minutes? Is that right? All right. That's it. Questions?
That's it.
That's it. Right.
All right, put your hands together for Bernie.
No, you can take it off mute.
Okay. So I'm going to take some questions, but I actually want to start by asking at least one, which is Bernie, after the conference, December 4th, and we have Christmas and all that, as 2019.
Yeah, so 2019 looks like we opened a tech center. Because one of the things that I've found about Northeast Ohio is if you measured talk as a measure of GDP, we'd be the wealthiest city in America. So this is I've said to people all along, if we're just going to talk about this and not do it, I have too much stuff to do. My editor's working. So it's just not worth my time, effort, and energy if we're just going to talk about it. So next year would be, you can go see this tech center. Like you can go physically open a company there. There's humans working there. We have a regular schedule of meetings every single day throughout the region talking about blockchain technology. The curriculum has been updated at our universities. We have many more applications in the works. Large companies are thinking about opening innovation centers around blockchain technology and embraced it. I talked to a big local Fortune 100 company the other day, and I said, the CEO said, what are you guys doing in blockchain? He goes, I have no idea what that means. But that's okay. That's not uncommon. But as you dug deep in the organization, there's a whole group of people working on it. And what that conversation actually did is it elevated that in that company, which was great. Because now, it's like, now the CEO understands, oh, I see where this is going. I'm going to start investing in that. That means hiring more talent, et cetera. So that's where I see. So for next year, it's all about, if the analogy was, we're going to make a cake in this room, but we didn't make a cake for us to get fat and eat it ourselves, right? We made a cake because we want to start a bakery here, right? So next year is, okay, we're selling cake, right? We're moving and going.
Right on. So DriveIT is very honored that you've welcomed us into this collective, and there's a lot of great companies, Highland Software, KeyBank, a lot of. What kind of companies or what kind of industries are we missing and that we need to bring into the fold?
Yeah. So think about blockchain this way. So blockchain is also not a panacea, by the way. So blockchain isn't going to cure cancer, right? Just like the internet didn't cure cancer, right? So blockchain is about what are the things that are done today that are heavily paper, heavily ledgered, and there's trust issues. Anything that has that mix of ingredients, I can do it with blockchain. Blockchain isn't going to necessarily help me build a building, but what are the things that it can do about building permits, right? So if you're a company like Welty and you build all over the region or all over the country, every single little municipality has a different building code, which creates enormous amounts of friction and cost for them. So imagine if you could have a standardized system that would allow all that to work as one way. So I know that this regulation exists the same way across all other systems. That's a huge challenge to tackle. Anything like that is where blockchain really, really works. Where you need to validate identification. So supply chain, again, most of what the government does. I was talking to Dr. Boutros, who runs Metro General. So if I died right now, when do you think my wife would get my death certificate? 6 months.
Wow.
6 months. So the state will say 6 months later, yep, he's dead. What you guys witnessed in 4 seconds, right? The state of Ohio goes, confirming indeed he is dead. I've been buried and halfway decayed, and the state finally says he's dead. The reason that creates a problem is because it doesn't release your insurance benefits, right? You're not actually legally, there's a whole cascade of problems that happen because that little piece of paper is not issued in a prompt manner. I was talking to the director of ODOT, and he looked at the director of public safety and said, right now, all these road decisions, like should there be an exit ramp, all that stuff, the data that ODOT looks at is public safety data from 2.5 years ago. Wow. So they're making decisions that are 2.5 years old. I mean, you would never, can you imagine in your building, you say, I'm looking at 2.5-year-old market data. You're like, okay, well, that's not that good. I need to know what's going on today, like what's happening right now, real time. So those kinds of things you can do.
My last question is, you mentioned how a year from now you want to see 1,000 blockchain-enabled coders. Of course, DriveIT wants to do its part. I'm sure people like Tech Elevator and others want to do their part. What do you see as the realistic chances of getting that 1,000 workers? And if so, how are we going to get them?
I would answer the question this way. I think as a collective community, because we are, right? We all live and die by the fortune of Northeast Ohio until we decide to move, right? We have to all decide how important it is for us to take advantage of this situation, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to do what we say we're going to do. I hear a lot of times, well, chicken and egg. I go, no, it's not a chicken and egg. It's either you do it and we take advantage of this window of opportunity, or we say, I'm 51, I'll live till 80 and then move to Florida and then retire down there. And during that time period, I'll watch a gradual total decay of Cleveland, and I'm okay with that because my kids will figure it out. That's the binary choice that's made. We either have, because when else are you going to have this kind of things where the Earth, Moon, and stars line up like this? So as a region, we have to do our collective effort to say, we're just going to do this and not talk, naysayer, 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 because that's easy. Believe me, I'd much rather be the guy in the corner saying, yes, right? Much more comfortable. I can do that in the comfort of my sofa. But we have to all work together to get this done.
Right on. All right, questions? I know you got some. All right, 1 second, let me get back here so I can get you on the video. Make sure you talk loud.
Okay, I guess the question I have is the recipe that you mentioned in regards to the 10 nodes. How does that fit with the Jumpstarts, the bioenterprise that I've done work with over the years?
Can you advance to that screen?
Can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I did,
okay.
yeah. So the question, just to repeat, is how does that fit in with what Jumpstart and Team Neo and Jobs Ohio? This is first of all, it's a coalition of the willing. So this isn't we'll let David in, but not James. This is a coalition of the willing. So on the entrepreneur environment node, Ray Leach, who runs Jumpstart, is the co-chair of that. Joe Roman, who's the head of the Greater Cleveland Partnership, runs the co-chairs the political environment piece. So you've part of the exercise also that's a byproduct of this is that organizations that weren't necessarily normally working together are forced into forced cooperation now, much like will happen in any kind of blockchain system. So people are engaged at the highest levels and all that. All these organizations are in there. Team Neo's in there, Jobs Ohio's in there. Even Randy Cole is one of the smartest guys I've met in this effort. He's involved in this node. He runs the turnpike. So you think, what does the turnpike have to do with it? Well, because if you have remember the analogy with James and David, right? Randy's job is to make sure there's security in these smart roads and make sure that that drive over the bridge doesn't happen.
Next question. I know we got him.
Explain to me a little bit more. Explain to me a little bit more about the capital, where it's going to come from. You mentioned Jumpstart, but
Sure.
you know, who else has said, "Gee, I like what you're doing already," and you know, we'll bring capital to the table if you give us good reason to put it here.
And to add on to that, how much capital do you think we need?
Well, I mean, it's, I gave you the $1 billion number. I think where that comes from is you create a fund. Two things. Number one is you create a fund that would be one of the first ones out there, and we happen to have the geography. See, if we lived in Boston, if this were a meeting in Burlington, Massachusetts, we say we're going to invest in opportunity zones. The nearest opportunity zone is in Hartford, Connecticut. So it's like, that doesn't help me, right? So we have the opportunity zones here, so we can do that. That's number one. So that's a lot of money that would come to that. So that fund can take people, there's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of people who have cap gains that would love not to write a check to the IRS, instead make an investment. Okay, that's a dramatically low risk way to do it. I don't think you need much government money beyond that. I really don't.
Third frontier kind
It can be. So certainly Third Frontier, which has money, Jobs Ohio, which got a lot of money, right? Team Neo's got a lot of money. Jumpstart's got a lot of money. You can have that be catalytic. So in other words, you can say to an investor, so James has got $10 million he's going to put in this fund. As the Third Frontier Jobs Ohio combination can say, hey, listen, we're in for 10 first, so we're going to hedge your risk even more. That gives me comfort of why this can happen here. The physical location is probably a $300 million project to build out this tech center. Wow. So that's got to be funded a certain way. That's something the state can do. So the state can also do, with the budget with the new governor, could say, hey, we're going to set aside money for technical and digital transformation for the state. So that makes it even more appealing for private companies to come in and help solve those problems. So I think money is, I think, easier probably than some of these other ones. May not seem that way, but I think that the policymakers realize that this is what they've got to do.
Bernie, I don't want to get too political here, but I do want to ask you, have you gotten positive reactions from both sides of the aisle, depending on who is going to win the election? Are both committed to engaging BlockLand?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we all know we live in a super nonpartisan world, so it's super easy. Democrats love each other, Republicans love each other, everybody loves Trump, so it's great. No, none of this is political, meaning partisan, right? So I think we've kept it, the way I always frame it, whether I'm talking to a Democrat or a Republican, whatever, is listen, if the government can operate more efficiently, right, that's not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. What happens with that savings, maybe you guys can argue about that, right? Maybe the Republicans are going to say cut taxes, and the Democrats are going to say let's make some investments in X, Y, and Z. But that's not this, right? Our conversation is a more efficient, more transparent, more trustworthy government. Nobody should be opposed to that.
Argue with that.
Yeah.
1 second. Here we go.
So you talked about your focus is different here. Cryptocurrency, no. So what's the yes to? I mean, where is this going to work?
Yeah. So cryptocurrency is just one app. So if you take a look at your iPhone, so I'll look at mine here. I got 3 pages of apps. Cryptocurrency is one, just one application. So there's 3 other pages of other things that you can do with blockchain. I'll give you an example. So my 24-year-old daughter, not me anymore sadly, will walk into a bar in Washington, D.C. She looks young. They'll say, may I see your ID? She's 24, so this one's, the one she has now is actually real. So you show a driver's license. But on that driver's license, I give you my driver's license. James now knows that I'm in Akron and has my address. What prevents him from calling his buddy and saying, hey, there's this cute girl. She's at the bar. I'm going to let you know when she leaves. Here's her address. Why did I have to give that much information to the bouncer at a club? That makes no sense. So if all these things are digitized, maybe instead she pulls out her iPhone and gives a single-use barcode that tells the bouncer the only piece of information he's entitled to. I'm over 21. That's all. You don't need to know anything else. I don't care that you know I don't want you to know I'm an organ donor, right? Maybe you have a friend that needs a kidney, and now you're looking at me going fresh meat, right? So I'm 21. That's all you need to know. So that's an application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so to follow up on that.
If it's
Yeah, so it's not, so when you talk about blockchain, a lot of people use the word trust, right? And as I listen to what you're saying, I hear you're creating a rule of law, all right? You're redefining the rule of law. So is it about trust, or is it about defining rules of law that are more pertinent to the current description we have into society today?
So it's a great question, and I think the answer is the end result is complete immutable trust. And the way you get there is by establishing an upfront, agreed upon rule of law. It's exactly that everybody understands what the rules are. So there's no hiding. That's the one thing you can do. You can't hide anything with blockchain because you can't change the record of what's happened. You know, he talked about the pickup basketball game, right? If I said, no, Eric, it's 5-0. And the rest of you guys go, 5-0? It's 1-7. What are you talking about? Okay, I guess it's 1-7, right? Because I can't change it's totally transparent. There's no hiding. The other analogy I use that's similar to pickup basketball, I don't play basketball, is if you're playing poker, right? But you don't bring chips. Because why do you need chips? You need chips so that everybody knows where everybody's at. Instead, everybody's writing down everybody's bets and the results. And well, imagine that everybody's card has to agree. It's immutable and you can't change the results. That's what blockchain does. So so we don't get so esoteric about this. Here's what I want you to do. So I want you to go up to a random 7-year-old that's related to you, okay? Right? Not a random 7-year-old, a random 7-year-old that's related to you, and explain to him what Blockbuster Video was. And I want you to explain it to him and what that meant, right? So what did Blockbuster Video mean? Dean, it meant that you and I on a Friday night got in our cars, drove half an hour, spent an hour walking through the aisles, right, picking out a movie, went to a cashier, paid for it, drove back home, put it in a machine, and it played the movie. That 7-year-old would be like, you're just making stuff up. That never happened, right? But it's the same thing as so if you explain to us what video streaming and Amazon Prime and Netflix was to me in 1989, I'd be like, I don't understand what you're saying. Because there's no way that can work that way. I can't possibly go on a portable device and watch a live baseball game. That's not true. You're lying to me. So it's hard because we're early on that curve, but in 3 or 4 or 5 years, everything I'm talking to you about right now, well, yeah, of course, I carry my digital ID, right? Medical records is another great application. So my daughter's lived in DC, she's lived in Cleveland, she's lived in Providence, Rhode Island, she's lived in Boston. Hospital records all over the place. So now she has a concussion, she's sitting at a hospital in DC, I need to get your medical records. It's taken her a week to get medical records, right? So how about if she owns her medical records and it's her property, not the property of the hospital, and I go to a hospital in Nashville, here's everything you need to know about me. I'm gonna give you permission to see my medical information because it belongs to me, not to this hospital. That's another great blockchain application. That will probably happen in the next 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years.
You know what blockchain can't solve is the super awesome geeky cashiers at Blockbuster. Now those are good people. We lost them. All right, you got a question?
I have one just related, I guess, comment or question maybe you can answer in terms of the cryptocurrency part or the tokenization kind of thing that you haven't talked about yet in relation to kind of what you're focusing on, which I like the focus of business and government and those types of things. But for me, as like a content creator, kind of I'm a musician, podcaster, those kind of things, there's a lot of value transfer or ownership rights issues with content creation.
Yep.
And so there's tokenization that goes along with it, and with that, and abilities to own those rights and transfer value and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of a structural thing I think that's coming out of the fast development of cryptocurrency applications, for example.
Yeah.
that I don't think we should overlook or diminish, or it needs to be a part of what we're doing here, you know?
I
make sense?
think cryptocurrency should be a part of this effort in this sense, that if somebody wants to come in and say, I've gotten the calls, hey, I have a buddy at First Energy, I can plug in there in the middle of the night and mine, okay, you don't need my permission to do that. What I'm saying is that if we were to lead with that and say Northeast Ohio is going to be the center of all cryptocurrency, the rest of the world would look at it and go, no, that already exists. But that doesn't mean that we can't have miners here, cryptocurrency people. The more the merrier. And by the way, this isn't just about blockchain companies. This is about blockchain being the center post of a giant technology tent where all tech is part of Cleveland, but we've become relevant because we know so much about business and government application of blockchain. What you're talking about, though, tokenizing music, that's not currency. It's related.
Well,
It's similar-ish,
well,
but no,
think about it in the medical record
Yeah.
application. So I own my medical records. I might be a special case, and I might want to sell my information because I'm so interesting of
Yeah.
a case, for example.
Right.
So like going forward, everything about us is going to offer value.
Yep.
And so as an individual, like Facebook is going to do this, whoever, like all our information is going to be tokenized or monetized.
Totally agree.
You can't escape that part of it. That's just my point.
No, I 1
you know what I
billion
mean?
percent, 1 billion percent agree with you. And whatever the next,
Whatever the name is.
whatever the
you
next thing
not
of Facebook.
Want to use cryptocurrency.
No, it's not currency. It's not currency because when we say currency, we're talking about dollars and euros and
Yeah,
pounds.
I agree.
So tokenization is huge. I totally agree. Think about this, which is how many of you guys wake up in the morning and it tells you 9 minutes to XYZ? You're like, how do you know where I'm going today? You're not supposed to know where I'm going. I have location services turned off, privacy off, my Facebook's app off. But why are you telling me? Because you know, Google, read a book called The Four. You know, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google have way too much power over our lives today. So the idea that you could say, hey, I will let you sell everything about me. I will let you say where I go eat, what I eat, how I eat it, where I go to the bathroom, how long I go to the bathroom. Whatever that data is worth to you, I'll sell it to you as long as I get something back. See, right now we give all these companies all that for free. They make billions of dollars and we get our privacy invaded. So at some point, that's going to break off and say, I'm going to create a social media platform that lets you opt in to this, but it gets me something. So that tokenization, music's a great example. So right now, if you're a musician and you create content, you have to rely on Apple to send your content out there. How about you just send it to the person who's going to use it directly, and you get paid through some sort of token system, for sure. I think you had a question back there. Yeah.
Well, I know this guy's moving. Well, I'll get back
Okay.
to you next.
You were talking about this opportunity corridor and center, and then there's going to be some decisions here in the next month or so that would further define that. Can you define or put some geography around that opportunity center Cleveland is, or Cleveland, Akron, Canton?
Oh, a lot of Ohio. So Ohio generally has a disproportionate amount of what they call it opportunity zones. So the idea was, think about the most distressed neighborhood. I think maybe here, don't get me if I'm wrong, but I think West Akron is a tough area of town. Is that true, false? Okay.
Part of it's also the nicest
Okay,
part.
all right. So, but there's parts. So you say, so imagine the parts of West Akron that you say, right? So maybe Welty isn't willing to build an office building in West Akron because it's kind of a tough area, right? So that makes that area kind of spiral down because nobody's willing to invest. So opportunity zone is about saying, hey, listen, you're going to write the check to the government anyway, right? Why not make an investment here that's catalytic to transform this area? So they call that a zone. So the way it worked is the federal government passed this law, part of the Tax Reform Act of 17. The governor of each state then took their map out, and I'm super simplifying, obviously, and basically drew circles around zip codes and said these exact zip codes are the defined opportunity zones. That happened in May-ish when Kasich did that. And then now, in the next 30 days, the Treasury Department has to come up with the rails that say, okay, really it's not going to be Bernie investing in one building. That's probably not the way it's going to work. It's probably going to be a fund that collects all this money and then invests it. So what are the rules around that? And that's what the rules are going to be written in the next 30 days.
I have worked with new market tax credits, which this seem to have a bit of a
It's that on steroids.
probably similar to that.
Correct.
But those areas that were identified by zip code, that's published now and it was released in May, and that includes Cleveland, areas of Cleveland and Akron and.
Yes, the whole state of
Can't-
Ohio
the
is mapped
whole
out.
state-
The whole
the
country's
state.
mapped out.
Okay.
So if you go on Google Opportunity Zones in Ohio, you'll get to a page that will eventually show you the geography that's mapped out.
And then what comes out in the next month or so?
The rules around the funds. So rather than you personally taking your exact dollars and putting it in a project, you can invest in a fund that Eric and I run for you at 10% commission. Just kidding, 20%. We said 20, right? And that we run a fund because we're going to take your money and 97 other people's money, and now we have $1 billion instead of like 200. Because if your cap gain is 142,000, which is a lot, it's not enough to be a big project. But if I can aggregate that into a huge fund, now it's powerful.
And downtown Cleveland is an opportunity.
Basically, the entire downtown Cleveland geography is in this opportunity zone, all the way down to Brook Park by the airport.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about Bernie is that he, unlike some people in Cleveland and in Akron, don't draw some line of demarcation between, oh, it's got to be Cleveland, so nobody else, or it's got to be Akron, so nobody else. That's one of the cool things about BlockLand.
Yeah, somebody asked me today, how does the rest of Northeast Ohio fit in this? And I used this analogy that that made him uncomfortable, so I loved it. I said, if I shot Jim in the heart, it wouldn't be just like this perfect little dot. There'd be crap everywhere. Right? So BlockLand's aimed at Cleveland because that's our major metropolitan city, but that doesn't mean, right, if you think of Cupertino, California, that isn't just, oh, everywhere else in Silicon Valley's dead. It's just Cupertino is a wealthy area. It's the whole thing. Within 50, 60, 80, 100 miles of there is the valley.
Buckshot.
Yeah, Buckshot, there you go.
Bernie, first of all, thank you for doing this presentation and educating me on BlockLand and blockchain. Question tying into the opportunity zones, but also talent development and retention. With all of the movements and alignment about re-engineering our talent pipeline back to the K through 12 level, and you're looking at in 2025, you say blockchain will reach its maturity. How can we begin to prepare the next generation as opposed to not just bringing talent back in, but in these opportunity zones, you have young kids in Akron and Cleveland and other areas that could actually start learning the blockchain. How can we help to re-engineer that talent pipeline so a kid graduating as a senior in high school could probably walk into a company as a blockchain programmer or something like that?
First answer is get him on the philanthropy subcommittee, right?
Right. Well, we have to start now. I mean, we can't wait. Again, we're on a time machine, 1994, too. Would we have gone, everybody doesn't have 100% influence over an entire region. We all have our own little share of it, right? So going to our high schools, to our principals, to our universities, to our community colleges, to places like DriveIT and say, you need to get going. You need to start on this now, I think is really, really important. We have to start training our kids from the very, very beginning. The good news, the really good news, is learning how to be a blockchain coder is not the highest level coder that you could possibly be. Now, maybe if you're going to be here and figuring out quantum computing, that's, the guy, the chief technology officer at NASA was explaining to me quantum computing. I told him the last time somebody explained it to me was my daughter's friend who was a boy, believe me, not boyfriend, this kid at MIT, and we went to dinner, and I asked him, I said, hey, can you, what are quantum dots? What does that mean? And he said, just a second. He put his head down for like 45 seconds, then looked, one more second, put his head down for another minute and a half. I started laughing. I'm like, did I break him? What happened to this kid? And he finally looked up and goes, I'm so sorry, I can't figure out how to dumb it down for you. So I said to the guy from NASA, be gentle. So that is a higher level calling, but you can take somebody who, I'm now 32, I was kind of I was into tech, but I'm not a tech guru, and with a good program, you can turn that person into a high-paying blockchain coder today. I have a 19-year-old who works for my private company. Now, he told me this after the fact, not before. We were doing some stuff in blockchain around car titles and things like that, and Dubai is converting their entire government to blockchain. He gets an email. Next thing you know, he's on a first-class flight to D.C. He gets put up at the Mandarin in D.C. He gets lunch at the embassy of Abu Dhabi, and they offered him $225,000 a year guaranteed for 2 years, plus all living expenses and moving expenses if he moved to Dubai. 19. Wow. Now, he told me this after the fact. I'm like, oh, thanks. So you considered it. And he goes, hell yeah. But he didn't do it because scared of, I'm going to live in Abu Dhabi, right? Thank God for me. At the end of it, he got a raise. But the point being, right? So the point being that you can make a lot of money right now. Now that will die down, right? Because there's supply and demand, right? But if you're a high-level blockchain coder right now, you can knock on Progressive's door and get a pretty good shot at getting a job offer at a good pay. 5 years from now, that same job offer may not be as but because so you have there's built-in incentives to do that now. We just have to get going as a region so that when we sit here and say, hey, we have these conferences going on, it's not come to Cleveland for a conference and leave, but it's like, wow, I keep having to come to Northeast. Imagine if a company in St. Louis is saying, I keep having to go to I keep going to CSU, to Tri-C, to Akron, to Summit Community College, to Lakeland Community College. I'm going there all the time to hire these great people. Maybe we just need to move there. Right? It's the third time I'm flying out there, and these conferences are there, and they got the money, and they got the clients. We're just going to move there. That's the idea behind why all these things interplay with each other.
So going back to the regionalism piece and kind of to piggyback off of what both of you said, in light of the fact that Akron does have 14 opportunity zones, most of which encompass the downtown area, we have several higher education institutions, one of which has a comprehensive 4-year cybersecurity program. And we do have a K through 12 college and career academies program that does allow high school students to graduate with cybersecurity and or tech skills. Where is this initiative at with engaging the appropriate folks from this region on all this?
I'm one guy. They should be part of that. I'm a pretty transparent guy. I've sat in meetings in Cleveland where we go, no, we've been trying to get Akron to cooperate with us for 44 years. Those guys don't want it. That mentality has got to end. So how do you end it? We can't just look to our leaders and say, hey, end it, because they're not going to. So you just have to demand that. My point of view would be, high tide raises all boats. The analogy I use with I think that if I'm going to be deprecating on Cleveland, it's like the movie Titanic, where we're all holding on to these melting ice cubes. And so we're fighting each other to go down eventually, but last. That mentality of, if this is happening in Cleveland, it's bad for Akron. If Akron starts doing it, it's bad for Cleveland because the pie is just shrinking. Whereas the opposite is true, right? The opposite is true because because there are going to be people who want to live here, who are from here, Bath is where I was born, so that's where I want to be. So this idea of rising tides is what so I would say tell people here, get involved.
Well, and I work for the Chamber of Commerce, so I know that the appropriate folks that are involved with all three things that I mentioned that would jump at getting involved with this. I came here seeing the hashtags, kind of looking past it, thinking it was just a branding campaign on Twitter. This is much more of a comprehensive regional strategic plan than I thought it was.
Because if it's not, it's going to fail. If it's just a marketing thing where it's BS, then we're never going to get there. But like I said, and I've said this to everybody publicly, listen, I've been here 13.5 years. I love Cleveland, but if we don't take advantage of this exact window of opportunity, then we deserve to die. I'm kidding you. We don't deserve economic success because we are then our own worst enemy. Like this will never, ever, ever happen in our lifetimes again. And I personally care too much about this community to let that happen. So my point is, I don't want followers to this movement. I want fellow evangelists running down with me. It's not. That's why I spend my. What day is today? Wednesday? I don't even know what day it is. Tuesday? Is it Tuesday? Feels like a Wednesday. Tuesday night with you guys here because this is so important. And I just came from a meeting in which the exact comment was made: the Akron Chamber will never cooperate with us. They're our enemy. They view ourselves as an enemy. It's like that. There's people who've run the town, and when I say the town, call it Northeast Ohio, for a long time. It's time for them to say, we gave it a shot.
Let's go run.
Let's now let new people come in with new ideas that don't have these 40-year-old fights in their head.
Well, I speak for the Chamber on the contrary. We would absolutely like to.
Good, please
And
engage any way
let me add
possible.
on to that. DriveIT, when I was talking to my friend Bob Sopko about Bernie and BlockLand, we reached out to Bernie and we wanted to be a part of this. And I think what Bernie's saying is step up.
Yeah.
You know?
Like I said, he didn't ask permission to join. I said, you're in, let's go, giddy up, right? There's a
Take on-
coalition of the willing.
Take on the biggest role you can,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
You know, and thank you for being here. I'm not an IT company or anything. I just came from my own personal interest. I've
never-
heard about
never
it.
mind.
Talked to you when I got here. But I mean, I'm a lifelong Clevelander. This sounds great. You've done a lot of upfront work and everything. I mean, I visited Toronto for like the last 40
Oh,
years.
cool.
40 years ago, Toronto looked like Cleveland. Now you go to Toronto, it looks like New York City. This could be a catalyst. And, you know, you talked about getting involved. You know, how does the average person or business people get involved with something like this?
Any way that you want to, literally any way you want to. We have a BlockLand Cleveland Facebook page. We share a lot of really, really great articles. And again, I want you guys to understand that Cleveland isn't about the city. I said to the mayor today, I said, I don't live in Cleveland. I live in Westlake, right? So Cleveland is, because we're communicating to the outside world, right? And so that's the major metropolitan area, right? That's where, if we're in Australia, you don't say I'm from Bath, you say I'm from Cleveland, right? Now, unless you meet somebody from Cleveland. It's funny because I interview people all the time. So in my company, I have to interview them before we hire, no matter what position it is. I go, are you from Cleveland? Oh, no, I'm not from Cleveland. Oh, where are you from? Macedonia. Like, that's not Cleveland, right? It's like I wasn't being that granular with you. I meant, like, are you from this area? And so I think we have to change our thinking. How you can get involved, back to that, join the Facebook page, spread the word. If you're in front of an elected official, push it. You know, I'll give you another example. So I'm going to pick on who the younger people are in the room, right? There you go. So remember I gave you the Blockbuster analogy? Here's what I want. 5 years from now, you explain to your 7-year-old that you drove in your car on November 7th, said, damn it, where's that polling booth? At the Lutheran church? Or is it the Baptist church? I forgot. Oh, damn, it's a Lutheran church. You drive there, you stop in a parking lot, you wait in the line, you show somebody an ID, they give you a piece of paper, you go in a curtain, you fill out little zeros, and then you hand it back, and you hope your vote counted.
Right.
That's the way currently voting happens today, right? That instead, wouldn't it be better if on a given day it's time to vote, here's my ballot,
Boom.
right? I want to hit a button, I want to look into that. I want to look into that. Say no to that horrible California-driven BS pension fund amendment. Oh, I don't know what any of that means. Let me see. Rather than just watching a TV commercial, oh, I see it, I'm educated, I'm going to vote yes. I'm going to vote for this person, I'm going to vote for this person. Boop, instantaneously. And then I can log into a website and verify that my vote got counted the exact way I intended it to be counted. Wow. And it happens instantaneously like that. That company exists today. Except that in Ohio, that was one of the companies I invested in. So full disclosure. That company has done absolutely nothing in Ohio. But we did the votes in West Virginia. Yep. We did the votes in LA. We're doing voting in Wyoming because there's a part of me that wonders who would vote more under that scenario? Absolutely. Young people. Sure. Oh, yeah. Do we want young people voting? Oh, yeah. Right?
I do.
But young people don't vote. And so as a result, if you're a policymaker, I'm going to talk to the 50 and older person and ignore 18 and 35-year-olds because I hear what you're saying. I hear you're animated about that, but you're not going to vote. So I really don't care about you. So that whole revolution could happen through a blockchain voting system. That's really, really, really important. So there's people running for Secretary of State that will make that decision. There's one person that says that's what we should do. There's another person who says, no, all voting should happen on paper. To which my point of view is, do you remember Bush v. Gore? I mean, I know it was a while ago, but damn, right? So that should factor in, because politicians are stage actors that rely on the crowd to tell them what to say. So if they hear ordinary citizens tell them, hey, you need to embrace this technology, all of a sudden they're like, damn, I better do that because that's what my voters are telling me to do. I guess I would say that at that lowest level, all the way to come to the meetings. One of the ways we've gotten momentum is people who've run these organizations for 20 or 30 years say, I've never met all these people. Right. Look at all these people that are part of this movement. Damn, I better be accountable now. Versus they used to go into rooms, it was the same old 10 people. Same 10, and I'm sure Akron, right? The same 15 people would make all the decisions, and the same thing happens so now it's like, oh, this is a people's movement. That's different.
He's right, this group has a ton of juice. I mean,
Because of the amount of people going to just the sheer attendance. Just the sheer attendance. I got to be careful because I don't want to alienate people who run organizations for a long time, so I don't want to say the wrong thing, but that drives behavior. The idea that we're here listening to what you're saying, we want to make sure that you're on board. So back to the question about schools, that you say to your principals, hey, what are we doing about teaching kids blockchain? You may say it once, but all of a sudden they hear that 10 times in a week. Oh, geez, that's what our customers are telling us to do.
right. Who's next? Oh,
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble.
yeah, you are. Here we go.
Changed my mind. No, I got kind of a practical question. I'm very interested in seed capital.
Yep.
And I know you have this conference coming up in December, and I'm curious, number one, how's the conference going to be structured? Exactly what's it going to do? And specifically, how's it going to facilitate or whatever as to seed capital? And I might add on to that, is it sensible for a seed capital investor to start looking now
Yeah, absolutely.
rather than wait till December?
Sure, again, I would use a 1992 analogy. So Ed, if you and I were sitting here in 1992, we would be trillionaires right now, right? Without any effort. Because, I mean, first of all, you could just invest in Bitcoin when it was at 13 cents. And know when to sell it. So that would be great, right? So you would know Microsoft, good, right? Google probably should have bought at the IPO. Facebook, right? We should have all moved to Boston and lent Mark Zuckerberg $2,000, right? We would have been pretty in good shape. So it's knowing which companies. The fact that as an investor, that you educate yourself on what are the companies that work well on blockchain, what are the companies that don't work well on blockchain. That gives you a competitive advantage versus other investors that don't know. That's number one. The conference, in terms of answer your question there, is so Saturday and Sunday is we call it Coder Day because we want developers here. Remember what I said to you, Earth, Moon, and the stars? We want the stars to say, I'm kind of Cleveland because they got this really cool coding session. That'll happen Saturday and Sunday. We got a whole thing for them, how to experience Cleveland and blah, 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 market Cleveland to them. And we have this really cool coding thing, academy there. And then Sunday night, we'll kick it off with whomever the new governor is going to be. A really cool motivational speaker, this guy that has his website called trendhunter.com, which is a really, really cool place. And then Monday and Tuesday is about investors, developers, entrepreneurs, bankers, lawyers colliding at the convention center. Where all of a sudden you're like, hey, wait, you're a seed investor? I'm a lawyer, but I got a client that has a great idea. He's looking for an investor, and I got this developer, and the magic is going to happen not in the sessions. The magic is going to happen at the coffee breaks, at the restaurants around town, at the dinners that are scheduled afterwards. That's just the beginning of what happens. I would encourage, like an Akron thing that you could easily do is, how do we get some spin-off here off of that conference, right? So the conference ends Tuesday. Why not do an Akron thing on Wednesday and Thursday that's more here about that same topic? Right? How do we get that spin-off? Because maybe you have people in town, and like Ed lives here, so he's going to be more interested in, hey, what are the opportunity zones in Cleveland? In Akron that we can invest in, and you kind of spin off of that. Because again, 1 + 1 = 10 when we work together.
Very good. We got time for one or two more questions. Who's got one? Yeah.
Nope, you answered it.
Yeah. See, I've always got plenty of questions, so if nobody has one, I'll ask.
Mine was just really simple. First of all, I want to commend you for putting all this together and kind of being the spearhead for this, because I have been following this and following you, what you've been doing with this lately. In your meetings or people that you've met with, civic leaders and the like, what has the feedback been? Are they buying into it?
Yeah.
Because I see, especially after this presentation, I see that this is like huge.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. So I'm curious to know have your conversations kind of,
Sure.
been about with them?
Actually, so far, really, really good. So I'd say absolutely, really, really great. Elected officials on both sides of the aisle, for sure. I would say that Mike DeWine and John Husted are fully on board. And I think that Richard Cordray and Betty Sutton are fully on board. Again, they say they are. I think, but I take them both at their word. The people who run these organizations, I think, were skeptical at first, for probably the same reason that he was honest about why he was skeptical at first. Is this just a marketing thing? The biggest enemy of this effort is misinformation. I had a policymaker come to my office yesterday. He says, "I think this is great, but are you concerned that you'll be a monopoly?" I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, because you own blockchain." I'm like, "No, I don't own blockchain." but if I did. No, so that little nugget of like, oh, here's this private business owner trying to sell region on his no, it's not. Right. Yes, I have a company that hopes to do car titles on blockchain around the country, but I don't own blockchain, right? And the other one is one around power. I think somebody said about currency conversation. Bitcoin, because of the way it works, is what's called a public blockchain. Eric didn't talk too much about this, but there's public blockchains like Bitcoin. There's private blockchains, which would be most of the 95% of the business and government applications would be private blockchains. A private blockchain doesn't use any more power than an existing database. Public blockchains use insane amounts of power because that's the way the system is designed. So you'll run into a policymaker who says, "Oh, no, we do this, we're a green city. Well, we don't want this because we're going to take all this power consumption to run blockchain." No, misinformation. So misinformation is our biggest enemy of this movement. So that's why, and by the way, the reason joining that Facebook page is so important is because I hear policymakers and people who run organizations say to me, "Hey, damn, there's 700 people on the Facebook page, right? We're one post away from being the one who's called out as being the uncooperative person." So that power of the people makes a huge difference on that. And the fact that you're commenting, posting articles, sharing it. You may, like even you're in the building business, you may see an article that says, "Oh, wait, this applies to us," right? The company, Sherwin-Williams guy can say, "Hey, we do supply chain. Wow, this applies to us. This is really great." There's a big article that got posted yesterday about municipal bonds now being issued on blockchain. The World Bank is issuing bonds now on blockchain. And it's some pretty crazy stuff, right? That's a really different way to get financing because you're going directly to people. So that is, so to answer your question, so far, very little friction, but we're Cleveland, let's be honest, right? We're LeBron, the minute LeBron came back, we're like, "Oh, he's leaving," right? So, the Browns started, "Oh, we're gonna lose every game this year too," right? So there's a naysayer part of our DNA that we can't help. So we almost want things to fail to prove that we're this inferior region. We just have to fight that instinct and say, no, we're gonna win this thing. We're gonna make this happen. We can be the Silicon Valley of blockchain, where now all of a sudden Northeast Ohio is this incredible tech mecca, which, by the way, can tie beyond Akron, right? Maybe we tie in, so what does Pittsburgh, Akron, Cleveland, Detroit look like as a competitive marketplace versus the rest of the world? All of a sudden it's like, wow, all those pieces came together? That's really exciting. So we just have to walk before we run and before we sprint, right?
Love it.
Wow. So.
Last question. Who's got it? All right. Let me just, yeah. I can talk.
Can I say a lawyer joke that I heard the other day was pretty funny? So because it ties into blockchain, because if we do this by ourselves, it won't work. So the lawyer said to me, he goes, "Well, the analogy is that a lawyer in a town starves. 2 lawyers in a town make a fortune." Sorry. Anyway.
So what are you looking for from the legal community? Are you looking for the legal community to build trust in the people that, jump on this movement? Are you looking, this is new to the legal community as well. So are we educating people? How do we educate ourselves on blockchain, on coin offerings? Because that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. So I would say selfishly, I want all lawyers in Cleveland to be the most successful lawyers possible, because you'll occupy buildings, you'll buy Mercedes, you'll go out to dinner, you'll create economic activity, right? So we want you to be disproportionately successful. And the way you're going to do that is because lawyers in Cleveland will be the most knowledgeable about this part of the business. So if James is thinking, I'm going to do this blockchain thing, but there's a lawyer in New York that I'm going to hire, that doesn't help Northeast Ohio. So so the legal community is about two things: being the most cutting edge, knowledgeable, and also understanding all the implications of this brave new world. I talked to a guy the other day. Think about, again, Facebook is 14 years old, right? Think about when Facebook started. How many people in this room joined Facebook day one? Day one, you're lying because you had to go to Harvard. Not day one. So day one. Okay. So you were now in the first year, you'd raise your hand, and then if you had people say, "Hey, you're on Facebook," you'd be like, "What's Facebook? I'm not gonna. Why are you doing all of that, right?" And now, think about the evolution of Facebook and what Facebook does to our world today. It's so incredibly. Influencing. It's incredibly influencing, right? It's incredibly influencing. Think about how many negative articles you share without knowing whether that article is real or not. Think about your data and how it's being used to your, not necessarily benefit like we talked about with Jim earlier, right? So the idea here is the legal community is, okay, if this is all the system's going to go that way, let's be ahead of the curve from a legal perspective instead of figuring it out later, and that's the call to the politicians too, which is, rather than, I say the most incredible Senate testimony of my generation is Mark Zuckerberg before the Senate panel. I mean, that to me was like an aha moment, because those senators didn't just walk out there and go, okay, let me start asking questions. They had weeks of briefing with staff, and they still asked the most asinine questions possible. That shows you the depth of lack of understanding. So those are the people we're charging to regulate this world. Holy crap. Right? That's not, it goes from amusing to like frightening, because, right, Mr. Zuckerberg, how do you make money if you offer your system for free? And he sat there and goes, don't be sarcastic, don't be sarcastic. We sell ads, we sell ads. That's all I'm allowed to say, right? So maybe this time the politicians are thinking before this technology rolls out, what are the implications? And you need the lawyers, because you said it right? This is about rule of law. Okay, well, we need the lawyers to understand what is the roadmap going to be, so that we create this thing the right way and we become a really knowledgeable region around this topic. So that's the ask to the legal community, that you go back to your firm and say, hey, listen, I want to be involved in this blockchain thing. We need to move the firm to blockchain. We go back to progressive, and we need to hire some blockchain coders. We need to, that little sparks everywhere is what creates the proper movement. Does that make sense?
So I am going to bestow onto Bernie a DriveIT journal and a DriveIT keychain. This guy owns all kinds of car dealerships. This couldn't be more appropriate.
So I need another keychain.
I promise you he has more cars than so let's put our hands together for Bernie and say thank you so much.
Thank you.